I had been toying with the idea of starting an Necron army for a few months, and I was kind of on the fence because I'm not I mean, obviously, I don't play the game. I just paint the models, and there was something kind of interesting about the Necrons in that I'm free to use kind of metallic colors, and it seemed like an interesting way of getting a nice win. Have a nice army that is relatively easy to paint. But, I'm not quite sure how I feel about the aesthetic of the whole army. And then I saw that Warhammer released one of my favorite characters from the Infinite and the Divine, that is one of the perhaps top shelf of Warhammer 40k novels, Orican the Diviner. He's one of the two Necrons that kind of are pitted against each other. They're clearly enemies, but they're also clearly frenemies. I'm not saying they're bumping metallic uglies every couple of thousand years, but I wouldn't put it past them. They're an interesting not couple, and I love them to death. And so that offering from Games Workshop finally tipped me over the edge. They used one of the characters from one of my favorite novels to get me to purchase, well, at least for starters, a kill team, but maybe there'll be more. I don't know. So in this video, I'll be painting Orican the Diviner, and I'll be talking about one of my favorite novels from the Black Library, The Infinite and the Divine. Hello, and welcome to Your Average Bear Gamer. I am George. Today, let's geek out on some Necron lore. Alright, so the very first thing I need to get out of the way is that I kind of messed up a little bit. When I saw this offering, Orican the Diviner, I was really excited, and I bought it immediately. I think it was the day it was offered. I don't know. I went to the Games Workshop site, and I was like, yes, I need this. I need this really badly. The thing is, Orican is not my favorite of the two characters. In fact, I find Orican kind of annoying. He's this snivelly little character who'll stab you in the back, and he kind of rubs me the wrong way. But I love how he interacts with my actual favorite Necron, and one of my favorite characters in the Games Workshop kind of universe, Trazyn. Is it Trazyn the Infinite? I think that's how he is. He's the historian, the archaeologist, the collector. He has museum after museum of all the things that have happened in history that have caught his eye. And he's not above kind of going into the historical moments and stealing some stuff before that event is over. It's a glorious concept that only can happen with a character that's a Necron, right? They live essentially forever. They can teleport, they can travel across the stars. My love for this as a vehicle for storytelling is just about boundless. And while this isn't Trazyn would not be anywhere near as cool without Orican to be the foil in that story. So, once I realized my mistake, I was like, okay, well, what do I do now? Eventually, Games Workshop will release Trazyn. I'm hoping. I know there's probably a model out there already, but I want kind of the new release. And so, with the idea in mind that at some point I was going to be able to buy a Trazyn model and have him as kind of the head of my Necron army or collection, I went ahead and did it anyway. Besides, it's a pretty cool model. Trazyn, he looks pretty impressive. He's got this weird reptilian snake thing going for him that, the Trazyn, I'm sorry, even now I get those two confused. The Orican I had in my mind doesn't look like this. While it took me a while to kind of enjoy this model, it's starting right. This model is supplanting my mental model, and it wasn't very fleshed out because I am not the kind of person who, when I read a novel, I see the characters and I see their actions. I'm not using my imagination that way, and I know that a lot of people do it that way, and that's cool. That's just not the way I do it. For me, they're concepts. Trazyn is a concept, Oricon is a concept, the Space Marines are a concept, and whenever the novel calls upon those concepts, I see the concept, not the actual figure of the character. Look, I know I'm weird. I don't need any external validation of that weirdness. I've accepted it. It's who I am, and I like it that way. But the advantage to that is that I am able to create or attach a visual image of Orican where there wasn't one before. The closest I got was like this priest kind of huddled over and like sneaky, mousy kind of thing, also attached to the Necron concept. So he's made of metal and kind of a robot. But that's as far as I got. And so as I painted this model, I think my mind is slowly replacing that kind of generic placeholder concept of Oricon with, well, this guy. And I'm not mad about it. I didn't see him quite as sneaky. I saw him as more snivelly. But this guy, he's got a grace of his own. And, yeah, I can dig it. I have no problem with this being the new Oricon in my mind. I'm just hoping, I'm crossing my fingers that when they do release Trazyn, he's a beautiful character. Because if he's not, I mean, who am I kidding? I'm going to love him anyway, but still, please, Games Workshop, make the next version of Trazyn the Infinite. Make him really cool. Please, I need this. So putting together this model was interesting. There's a lot of little things. It's kind of a finicky model, and one of the things I thought is that he's way too spindly. He's going to fall over. He's going to break apart. No, he's pretty sturdy. I am pretty surprised for as few points of contact as this model, Orican, has on the base, and as spindly as everything is. I mean, everything seems to be just kind of like sticking out and down of the model, like the core of the model. Nothing seems to be supported. It works. I even dropped it once as I was painting, and it didn't shatter. It didn't bend out of place. Everything was fine. I was really surprised. He looks way more fragile than he actually is. And painting this guy went pretty quick. I mean, he's a Necron, so he's going to have mostly, kind of this metallic color. And over that, there's going to be some details that I use actual color for. And so he went pretty quick compared to other models that I've painted in the past. And maybe I'm comparing it to my usual painting, which is usually like a 5 or a 10-man squad of models at the same time, and that usually takes me quite a while. So when I was done painting this model, I thought, well, that was faster than I thought. But I did have to overcome a little bit of a problem that was kind of up in here, is that I had to use a different color scheme, at least I think. Here's my reasoning. Here, you'll see the color scheme for the Necron kill team I recently finished, and I think I posted this already. And he looks pretty cool, for me, for my level of painting. But you'll notice that his metallic scheme is like bronze, and I chose that because I wanted to go with this teal color. And I chose this colored teal because I wanted these guys to be in the livery of Trazyn. So Trazyn, I believe, belongs to one house, and that house has their colors is like teal, and I think it's bronze. And so that's what drove my decision for these guys. And while I'm okay with the way they turned out, I'm just not sure if this was exactly what I had in my mind. Say whatever you want about my color scheme or my execution of it in these models. I couldn't use it for Orican. Say whatever you will about Orican and Trazyn, they hang out a lot, but their alliances are alliances of convenience, and they're very, very temporary. In fact, most of their alliances were just kind of a way of getting one or the other off the back so that we can better prepare the knife that you're going to stab in each other's backs. Betrayal is never more than a few pages away in the Infinite and the Divine. So, Orican, I didn't feel comfortable having him use the same livery as Trazyn. So I didn't. I went out and I looked for Orikan's house, and it turns out that their color is just silver gray, which is fine, but I need more colors than that. So I added a little bit of purple, and I added a kind of a dark gray to kind of indicate the alliance to that house. But the purple was more of a to demonstrate that Orikan, while he's allied to your house, he is mostly allied with himself. And purple is a color of royalty. I can totally see Orikan thinking of himself in that fashion. So I combined a little bit of the gray and I combined a little bit of the purple so that he has a little bit of both on his color scheme. All right, enough talking about painting. Let's go back to talking about the Infinite and the Divine. As I was preparing for this video, I was thinking about what is it that I loved about the Infinite and the Divine and what sets it apart from other Games Workshop's titles. And I want to have a caveat here because the Infinite and the Divine is, in my mind, probably top tier of all of Games Workshop's offerings to date that I've read. Right, I haven't read everything Games Workshop's put out, but I've read a fair bit, even if most of them are kind of old. The other series that I think is amazing, and I read it, and heck, I've read all of them, and I also listened to them on audiobooks. It was any of the books featuring Caiaphas Cain, or Caiaphas Cain. Commissar Cain is an amazing character. I wish I had a model of his to paint. I would love to have an Imperial Guard army of Cain's Valhallans. I think that would be wonderful. But that's for a different project. It's a different video. Those two are right up there for me. Everything else kind of falls far behind. I'm not sure where I stand with Gaunt's Ghost because it's been a long time since I've read that series. And I remember liking it, but I remember also it being it was a slog. It was just dreary. These people were under constant, not torment, but they were just constantly on the brink of death and destruction. And it was just emotionally taxing to read novel after novel after novel of Gaunt's Ghost just facing the worst odds imaginable. And therein, I think, is the difference for me between most of Games Workshop's literary offerings and the Infinite and Divine and Caiaphas Cain. Humor. For most of these books, there's some serious stakes for the characters. Although for the Infinite and the Divine, it's weird because it's weird because those high stakes are really happening to someone else. Orikan and Trazyn are kind of watching other people have, battles and things are happening, and then Orikan's having some political squabbles, and Trazyn's trying to sneak in and steal this, like a tank or some Space Marine armor or whatever. And yes, they have some serious struggles themselves, but that isn't until later into the novel, once their characters are established. And the takeaway for me isn't that they survived against the odds. Yes, that wasn't the important thing that happened in the novel. The important thing that happened in the novel is that I got to know Trazyn, I got to know Orikan, and I got to really like them as individuals. Yeah, they were flawed. There were some horrible, unethical, well, not human beings, but beings. But I understood their motivations. I understood their actions inside of the context of those motivations. And the dialogue was just boom. It hit every time. There was no wasted lines, and every line hit a punch. And even if not all of them were funny, they were all witty. They were all dry, and it was just perfect British humor, which I'm apparently a fan of. And I should point out, the version of the characters that I'm thinking about right now as I'm talking about the Infinite and Divine is not from the novel that I read. No, the version of the characters that I'm talking about right now are from the audiobook. The narration, or the person who was speaking the parts was perfect. This wasn't my very first audiobook, but I don't do a lot of audiobooks. This one, completely worth the money. I loved hearing the characters. I loved their accents. I love how they talk. And this point was driven home for me pretty harshly when I read, when I listened to another audiobook, this one's about the fall of Cadia, and Orikan or Trazyn were there, but the character was voiced by a different person, and it didn't have the same humor, it didn't have the same wit, and it didn't feel like Trazyn or Orikan. See, it's so forgettable, I don't know which of the two was there. I think it was Trazyn, but I didn't care. Like, he was just helping out the Mechanicus guy, and I didn't care. He wasn't Trazyn. He was some guy who looked like Trazyn, so far as I'm concerned. He certainly didn't sound like Trazyn. He certainly didn't talk like Trazyn, and I was kind of disappointed. And the whole fall of Cadia, pretty forgettable. Yeah. And so I think that kind of wraps it up for me in terms of what drives my like or dislike of one of Games Workshop's literary offerings. And I think it's the humor. Games Workshop, the Black Library, they handle some really big, heavy issues. Fascism, the extinction of the species, the struggle for survival, the logistics, and the funneling billions of man-hours of toil into this destructive endeavor just to survive for another year. They're heavy concepts in and of themselves. And yeah, we read or listen to these stories because there's a lot of action, there's a lot of fighting, but there's only so many times a Space Marine can chop off a guy's head with a chainsword. There's how many different ways can you say that? Those novels are so full of action, it all just kind of becomes samey. And that's why I think The Infinite and the Divine kind of rose above the rest for me. It wasn't samey. Yes, there was fights, and some of them were brutal, and some of them were bloody, and yada yada yada, but that wasn't what the book was about. The book was about these two characters struggling against each other, finding some kind of understanding with each other, so at some points it was them two against the world as opposed to just them two against each other. I mean, there was a mixture of all that stuff, but it was great, and as a result, I really enjoyed painting this guy. This is my Orikan the Diviner. He is not the best version of Orikan the Diviner, but he is my version of Orikan and the Diviner, and I like him. He will live outside of the units of my Necron army. He's going to be kind of a side character. Who knows if he'll ever join, will he be out there watching, keeping his eyes on Trazyn as he leads his troops. And Orikan will be there to stab Trazyn in the back when he's done the actual fighting and take whatever prize they're fighting for. That's what Orikan does. I use the new version of Army Painter's paints for almost all of this. The only thing I didn't use was this dark gray that was from the earlier Army Painter, but everything else is your Army Painter, including the metallics, including this green. He was a cool paint. He was a little difficult, but also not that difficult, because I did dry brushing for the base coat, and the rest of it just kind of fell into place. It wasn't that difficult because there isn't a lot of color on the model. There is obviously some, as you see kind of there, but color isn't kind of the primary point of these Necrons, at least not in my mind. These colors are just there to denote their allegiances and to cover their shamefully skeletal forms that they're not all that fond of, those of them who have a brain really to think about shame and things like that. And one of the reasons I'm sure that it's felt like such an easy paint was because A, it was just one guy, but also because the Warhammer Fanatics, whatever the second series of Warhammer, the second series of Army Painter acrylics are actually really good to use. They feel good coming off the brush. It makes painting an enjoyable experience again. It's weird to say, given that I'm not, 100% on Army Painter's bandwagon. These paints have really kind of sold me. I've got one more project that I need to get under my belt to really decide if this is something I want to go all in with, but it's kind of looking good. I didn't struggle with these at all, particularly with the Necron power globes that they have kind of all over the place. This uses a very light green. It's this light green, in fact. And had I used kind of the Army Painter 1.0, the original stuff, I would have struggled to get this on here because I didn't even base coat this. So normally when I paint, I have to, if I want to use a light paint like this, I have to undercoat with white. And since I do a primer in black or dark brown, that usually means I have to do a couple of coats of the white to get it nice and undercoated. And then I have to go and do a couple of coats of the target color. It's a mess, and this covered immediately. I did a second coat just to kind of make sure that it was kind of uniform and things like that, but this bright yellow-green color, I didn't struggle to put it on anywhere. Even here, when I used it just to drop it into those little lines to fill in those gaps, didn't struggle at all. Here you'll see I did a kind of a very, very light wash of that green to fall into those crevices without leaving the black tinted. It was no problem. Whether I was actually painting with it or glazing with it or just I dropped it and look, spindly little guy survived unbent, unbroken. Okay, I need to put him down and I need to stop gushing about The Infinite and the Divine because you've probably read it. It's one of Games Workshop's best books, and if you haven't, please buy it in physical print if you can find it. Buy it for your Kindle ebook, whatever it is, or buy it for your audiobook collection. It is amazing. Go for a long drive listening to these guys banter back and forth. It's entertainment. Well, that money can buy, because that's how you get those. Anyway, thank you very much for watching me ramble about Troslin and, okay, Orican the Diviner, because that's what the video was about. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.